Hello everyone. Faith, good morning to you too. Brave new Tarkle, good to see you. But enjoy your Latin class. KJ, Jakista, Gazishan, welcome. And Space Ramen, glad you can finally join us live. How you doing today, my friend? Y'all, we should be super duper excited. Steph, Armdivos, good to see you, my friends. Constantine, good to see you. Yo, lecture, exactly. No tie today. No tie today, but we do have the PowerPoint. Ooh, just doing some oceanography things, then moving on to Latin translations for class tomorrow. Amazing. Good luck with that, and you're gonna get some bonus modern history included. For free. Wolfie, good to see you. Catullus is funny. He's not my favorite, but he is very good. I do enjoy reading him. Hello! Finally around to actually catch a stream, Dr. Meow? Welcome, welcome. You picked one hell of a first stream to get. Look, I want you all to appreciate what I went through, because this past week, I have been just absolutely crunching some heavy, like 400-page military history volumes in order to feel up to date about this game. Because, yeah. It's... Oh yeah, no, turns out there is a ton of stuff written about the Czechoslovak Legion, and there is an absolute mountain of archival documentation from France, Czechia, Austria-Hungary, the Soviet archives, and published documents by legionnaires about their experiences. So, the military historians really can get down to what hour of what day did things happen. I've got a bibliography at the end of the PowerPoint. And Faye, thank you for the gifted sub to Space Ramen and Dr. Meow. Enjoy all of those lovely medieval marginalia emotes. Exactly. So should you watch this or get the game first yourself? You should totally watch this. This is a game, right? To introduce the game we will be playing, this is Last Train Home. It released today, and it is a fictionalized account that, according to the developers of the game, is really interested in communicating not the what of the Czechoslovak Legion, but the how of the Czechoslovak Legion. So it's set in 1919 into 1920, and basically dramatizes about a 3.5-year chunk of history to talk about the Czechoslovak Legion, the Russian Civil War, and the utterly harrowing journey that they made from March 1918 to November 1920, crisscrossing back and forth from Ukraine to Vladivostok. Was it terribly difficult to find sources in English? Amazingly, no. In fact, everything that I cited is either originally English language or was translated from Czech into English. So there has been a wealth of English language scholarship, mostly by British historians, since the 1950s, but also some of the biggest names currently active on the topic have been in Czechia, have been really good about trying to get their stuff into English language journals as well. Yeah, so I am super excited. Yeah, all the way to Vladivostok. We've got some maps, in case... My Russian geography was not very good before this, so I've got some maps to communicate how absurd this actually is. Hello, parishioner. So, here's the plan. I have a PowerPoint. that we are going to go through first. So basically, I have condensed thousands of pages of military history down into a short-ish lecture that is going to give us the historical narrative background for Last Train Home. There's a ton of detail that's going to get left out. There's a ton of information about, the trains and what life is actually like that we are going to save for the game itself, because, I played the demo of this, and I was like, this is good, we're going to have to play this. Now that I have crunched a bunch of military history, I'm like, Jesus Christ, this game is amazing. So, we are going to go in-depth during the gameplay part of it on topics like, the actual trains. Get into more detail on the narrative political history, on some of the stuff going on. But I figure it's worth, at the beginning, taking a chance here to go through the narrative history and understand what the historical background the game is drawing on is, because despite this wealth of study, and there is a ridiculous amount of study done on this, there is shockingly little American awareness of this utterly remarkable event. So I figure we need to start there. We're going to do introduction, try and keep it nice and snappy, 45 minutes or so, and then we're going to hop into the game and take a look at what the heck is going on and all the cool stuff they're doing. Also, this is an incredibly crunchy RTS. Just as a warning, Last Train Home is actually an incredibly crunchy RTS. So, when we get into it, the gameplay quality is not going to be super good, because I am not great at those games. But yeah, no, it is a mix of survival management simulator and RTS, and it is fantastic. So I am extremely excited. And that's super cool. So, as Oregon Trail meets Company of Heroes. You're not wrong. It's mostly small group RTS. It's not like Age of Empires where we've got 400 units on the field. It's small group RTS, but it still is RTS. And so it's gonna be super interesting. The largest group I saw in the demo was we controlled 12 units. I managed to still leave someone at the start of the level, but that happens. It's also, it's so good. I'm so excited, y'all. So, everyone feeling good? Everyone feeling comfy? Let me get some more cider here, because I have cider and then I have tea. It's called leaving someone to... No, the problem is, no man left behind. No man left behind at all. Doesn't work so well when you leave someone on the opposite end of the map. Alright, let's do this. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Ludo History. As always, I am Adam, and today we are going to be digging into Last Train Home, a brand new game by Ashbourne Games, a company based out of Brno, Czechia, about the Czechoslovak Legion and the utterly remarkable journey that they took from Ukraine to Vladivostok at the end of World War I in the middle of the Russian Civil War. We're going to start with a historical lecture, and then hop into the game itself, but if you enjoy this, first make sure you follow, for notified for all of the history games that we do here on the channel, because that's what we specialize in. I'm a professional historian, with multiple graduate degrees in history and heritage studies. So we do exclusively history games. If you like that, give us a follow to be notified for all those streams, and if you want to support the channel, you should consider subscribing here on Twitch. Or you can head over to patreon.com/ludohistory, where for as little as $2 a month, you can help support the channel, including some new perks related to the new website. Ludo History has a website now, just ludohistory.com, and that's got a blog attached, some extra projects, some extra information about what we are doing. So go check that out, and if you like it, consider donating a little bit to help keep the project running. So, without further ado, let's start out with our historical background. That's right, we got a PowerPoint, folks. So, we'll try and get through this pretty quickly, for the sake of getting into the game itself and not having to change ourselves over to just chatting. But I think it is important because there's a lot of narrative history that's getting condensed here, and so we try to keep it down to, just the very political, very military history, dates, names, events, stuff that is gonna be important background to help fit in the sort of extra cultural information that we're going to be talking about later on in the stream. That being said, disclaimer or 3. Let's zoom in on this just a smidge, actually. There we go. Right. There we go. Anyway. Oh, we're going to get there by hour 2. We're going to be done. Only the first chunk of this stream is going to be lecture. Don't worry. The warnings. I'm not a modern historian. I'm a medieval historian. I am not used to going through this much archival information. I'm used to having 12 primary sources, total, for the entire century. I also can't really read Czech. I can read a little bit. I can stumble through the hi, how are yous. I cannot read Czech beyond that. I cannot read Russian, I cannot read Ukrainian. My German, French, and Czech is... no. So, we're pretty much stuck to English language scholarship. I'm also not a military historian, I'm a cultural historian. What all this means is that I have done my research, I have done due diligence in getting things right, but I do not pretend to be the be-all and end-all of historical information here. If you think I get something wrong in this lecture, or at any point of the stream, please get some resources. Please share that with me. We want to try and learn together here. So, share those resources and let's have that conversation to learn and make sure we're keeping me honest and learning together. Look, this is not a statement of don't trust me. This is a statement of good historical practice means acknowledging your limitations. These are my limitations. That being said, because I am a cultural historian, like all cultural historians, I am obsessed with the idea of the long century. So our story of the Czechoslovak Legion in 1919 begins in 1867. Because of course it does. So we've got a nice 7-step plan that's going to guide what we are doing today. So we're going to start in 1867 through 1914, prior to World War I, just give you a situation of what it's like on the ground here. Then we've got World War I itself, and then we've got chunks of the different phases of what happens during the evacuation. So we're gonna split it up, January to May 1918, summer 1918, September 1918 to November 1919, and then the final year of November 1919 through November 1920, and then briefly touch on, they do succeed. So what happens at the end? So, let's actually turn down the volume on these two, so I can hear myself think. Step 1. Czechs and Slovaks in Imperial Europe. So, why do we start in 1867? Because 1867 is the year that the Austro-Hungarian Empire is formed. The Empire of Austria and the Kingdom of Hungary were separate entities before then, but in a compromise in 1867, they unified under one emperor. This is important because this is the first time in about 800 years, probably since the 9th century actually, since the Magyar invasions into Slovakia, that Czechs, the various regions of Czechia, Bohemia, Moravia, and Silesia, and Slovakia were united under the same ruler. And so that's the geographic heartland, right? The vast majority of Czechs and Slovaks, numbering somewhere around probably 5 million at the turn of the century, were united under the same crown. However, the geographic heartland is not the only place that the Czechs and Slovaks lived. Parisian observed that the sources from 1911 they have some interesting language choices. Still, outside of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the largest population of Czechs and Slovaks lived in the Russian Empire. Estimates vary. So it is anywhere from 70,000 to about 150,000 Czechs and Slovaks lived within the territories of the Russian Empire, for the most part here in Galicia, in what is now southwestern Poland, but also a large population in Volhynia in western Ukraine. There are smaller numbers in France, mostly, some in Germany, because Bohemia was a part of the German Empire before it was part of the Austrian Empire, and the United States of America. Hello, John Henry. Welcome, welcome. Now, the nationalist movement in Bohemia, especially, is really, really strong throughout the 19th century. There's a big, actually, nationalist labor movement in 1848 in the European urban revolutions of that year in Prague itself, but there are also a lot of nationalist groups. One group, I need to pull up I forgot to open my reference document, chat. Hold on. Take two. Let's see. There it is. Sokol is a perfect example of it, right? So Sokol was founded in the 1840s, but picks up steam in the 1870s. It's originally like a youth group. It's half Boy Scouts, half YMCA. Though it becomes co-ed by the end of the 1800s. It's also then gains aspects as a political forum, a library and archive of Czech Romantic nationalist literature and mytho-history. And it gets disbanded by the Austrian government in 1915 because they started calling themselves the Czechoslovak National Army instead of Sokol. It turns out Austria-Hungary was not a big fan of that particular idea, and so it gets shut down. And yes, Zoe, nationalist in the sense of advocating for their own nation-state. Probably the most prominent figure immediately pre-World War I is a man named Tomasz Masaryk. He actually is a professor at Uniwersytet Karlova in Prague. He was born from a Czech mother, a Slovakian father, born right on the border between the two countries now. And he starts off as a professor of Slavonic languages and literature, including dabbling in medieval history, which makes me like him. In 1899, he springs onto the political stage because he transferred into doing law. And passionately and incredibly effectively defended a Czech Jew who was accused in obviously a pretty anti-Semitic smear campaign of doing a homicide. And his defense in that forum springboards him into like the Czech public sphere. And he uses that to start advocating as the founder then of the Czech Progressive Party, advocates for an autonomous Czech democracy within Austria-Hungary. By about 1912, this has switched over to advocating for full Czechoslovak independence, and immediately pre-World War I, he goes into self-imposed exile to France. So he's going to bounce around throughout this story. You're going to see him a lot. In 1918, he is elected the first president of the Republic of Czechoslovakia. The other two people here are his companions in 1916. This photograph's from 1918, or the series of photographs are from 1918. of the three figures at the center of the Czech National Council. Uh, in the center here is the youngest of the three, Milan Stefanik, who is a astronomer who becomes a general in the French army and becomes the military advisor of the Czech National Council within the structures of the French army and the French Foreign Legion. He unfortunately passes away in 1919, but we're going to see him again before this story is over. The third person here is Milan Stefanik's professor at university, Edvard Beneš. Edvard Beneš is the second president of the Republic of Czechoslovakia and is the president in exile during World War II. So, if it weren't for Stefanik's passing, I'm guessing he would have been the third president of Czechoslovakia. Well, except for, the Soviets. But these three are absolute heroes of the Czechoslovakian national identity for the period, and they will continue to show up throughout this story for their diplomatic work. Anyway, with that framework in mind, we can now actually fast forward all the way into 1914. We're going to cover this in two phases, right? What happens on the Eastern Front and what happens on the Western Front. Why united Czechoslovakia rather than a separate Czechia and Slovakia? It's a good question. There's a lot of actual effort, right? This is a big question in 1916, and Masaryk himself is one of the primary identifiers of a united Czechoslovakia on the grounds of linguistic similarity, cultural similarity, and national historic similarity that calls back to the technically Polish Przemyśl dynasty, who were the pre-Magyar rulers of the region that is Czechoslovakia. If it weren't for Masaryk, I'm genuinely not sure if the Republic would have held together as it did, because when they are pretty much immediately after they stop being Soviet republics, the democracy of Czechoslovakia breaks up quite peacefully. But yeah, so there's some medievalism going on in there. We can look into that more later. Anyway, in 1914, when World War I breaks out, remember there's about somewhere in the vicinity of 100,000 Czechs and Slovaks living within the Russian Empire. Tsar Nicholas II looks at that and goes, you know what? I bet we could get some volunteers here. And so there's a call put out in 1914. The volunteer force, which originally is only about 1,000 people, which at the time is known as the Česká družina, the Czech company, is enlisted. Now, the družina is basically already advocating for Czechoslovak independence. There's largely pro-Czechoslovak sentiment, Czechoslovakian independence sentiment in the Russian Empire, and Tsar Nicholas is not a big fan of that, because if Volhynia starts advocating for independence, then maybe the Ukrainian Rada starts advocating for independence, and then the Russian Empire is not in a good way. And so he doesn't like that. So originally the Česká družina is not allowed to recruit from prisoners of war. They're not allowed to get volunteers from inside Austria-Hungary, and they are kept away from the front lines. So throughout 1914 into 1916, there's really slow growth for this, and they're primarily doing backline intelligence work thanks to sympathizers within Austria-Hungary. March 1917, there's a revolution inside of Russia. So the Tsarist government is overthrown, and a new government, an interim government led by Kerensky, is set up in its place. And so Kerensky right, does not care about, Russian, this thing of Russian imperial dominance. And so it's like, yeah, you are now allowed to recruit from Austro-Hungarian, Czech prisoners of war. The Czech Legion, or at this point the Czech Rifleman Brigade, explodes. So it is started as about 1,000 people in the first volunteer, and it's probably around 5,000 by 1917. By the end of 1917, it's 30,000 to 50,000. The smallest estimate is 28,000. The largest is 80 to 100,000. I think probably about 40 to 50,000 is most likely. Summer 1917, there's the last major offensive by the Russian government against the Central Powers. It goes catastrophically. The Russian army gets obliterated at basically every battle, except one, and that's the Battle of Zborov. And a key part of that is the Czech Rifleman Brigade. A contingent of about 4,000, or actually, I guess, yeah, I think it's a couple of companies, about 4,000 people, are at the battle, and they take less than 1,000 injuries, and capture 4,500 prisoners of war. Kind of insane. So they are lauded immediately. News of this spreads incredibly rapidly within Czechia, Slovakia, and the Russian Empire, and donations and manpower start cycling in really, really quickly to the Czech Legion. And so they have sympathizers all over the place. There's deserters from Austria-Hungary bolstering the Russian forces, or the Czechoslovak Legionnaire forces. And it's just, all in all, like, they become a centerpiece of the Czech nationalist agitation within Western Europe. So, we're going to cycle back to Western Europe in just a moment, but in 1917, with the First Revolution, Tomasz Mazurek, this guy, travels to Russia to start sort of acting as an intermediary between the Czechoslovak Legion and the Kerensky government. And that goes quite well, right? He's quite effective at lobbying for more resources, more attention for them, and generally is really doing a lot of unifying work within and around the Legion. Problem. October 1917 happens, and there is a second revolution. By the way, Alex, thank you for the 3 months of Prime sub. We're happy to have you here. Mazurek reads the writing on the wall, and with the start of the Bolshevik Revolution, immediately recruits Benesch, or sends a message to Edvard Benesch in France, to start negotiations with the French government and the other Entente powers to get the Czechoslovak Legion out of the Eastern Front and to the Western Front to continue fighting against Austria-Hungary. They approve this plan in December 1917, but it takes a little while for the Bolshevik government does kind of hems and haws for a bit on this. In March 1918, both the remains of the Kerensky government, the Ukrainian Rada, and the Bolshevik government at a couple of stages signed the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, which officially ends Russian involvement in World War I, but it also draws the line of how far the Central Powers could push awfully far east. Right, where they were when the Brest-Litovsk Treaty is signed, and the territorial concessions that are given by the treaty are not the same thing. And so, the Czechoslovak Legion ends up trapped in this ceded territory, which includes the city of Kyiv. And so they begin their uh, evacuation towards the east at the exact moment that Bolshevik forces take Kyiv and German forces take the surrounding countryside. Officially, it begins on March 15th, 1918. The treaty is signed in February, but everything goes into effect in early March. Alright, now let's back up. In the Western Front, Czech volunteers, oh yeah, no, I've got a map that's going to show you exactly how fucked they are. It's not good. Anyway, in the Western Front, Czech volunteers began fighting right away in 1914 as part of the division within the Moroccan Foreign Legion. They were under the command of Milan Stefanik. Stefanik becomes a French citizen in 1912 and enlists with distinction in 1914. In 1915, though, the Foreign Legion has taken an absolute beating, and after I think it's the Battle of Arras, the Czech company within the Foreign Legion has taken so many casualties that they're disbanded and integrated into other units. Around the same, they continue fighting as part of these integrated French units throughout the rest of the war, but most of the interesting stuff in the Western Front is diplomatic, because Benesch, Masaryk, and Stefanik are all living in France. And so Benesch and Masaryk start traveling around Paris, London, Birmingham, and eventually the United States to agitate for the Entente powers to promise Czechoslovak self-determination upon victory in World War I. And gives Masaryk in particular was an incredible orator, and so gave multiple speeches that received like standing ovations at to the French Parliament and to British academies on the subject of the Czechoslovak question. And so in 1916, the three of them officially formed the Czech National Council and are able to exert quite a lot of diplomatic force because Stefanik, right, Masaryk was the orator. Benesch had a lot of connections in Austria-Hungary and was able to tap into intelligence networks there. And Stefanik was besties with the tippy top of French scientific and political society. So the three of them are just an absolute power trio and accomplish a lot diplomatically. So in 1917, with Entente support, new Czechoslovak divisions are formed in the French and Italian armies, and Stefanik fully becomes a general in the army. And this works out, and on October 28th, 1918, Czechoslovakia officially declares independence, with Tomáš Masaryk as the first president. I think we have recordings of some of his speeches. I'm not sure, though. We can look into that later, Zoe. So, remember that date? It's going to be important in about 30 minutes. So, here's the situation in March. I am not a professor, but I work in museums and archives and in reference services and all sorts of stuff. So that's good. Hey, Bill! Archaeology Tube, good to see you. We're learning about 20th century history, and it's great. Anyway, let's blow up this picture a bit, because this is the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, and this is a big deal. So, because Russia lost, right? Why were these treaties on the Eastern Front which trapped allegiance here in the first place? Right, it's part of the negotiations. Germany says we're going to stop shelling you if you give up this territory, and Russia's not in a place to say no. So they cede everything through the Sea of Azov, from Rostov up to just shy of St. Petersburg. Let's see, yeah. Kyiv's somewhere around here. And so that's a problem, because in 1918, actually at the end of 1917, the Czechoslovak Legion is pulled from the front lines to guard munitions warehouses in Kiev. And so in March, Bolshevik forces enter Kiev, German forces are threatening Kiev, and the Czechoslovak Legion has orders, which is to get to the Western Front. Now, there's just a small problem. The Western Front's all the way over here, and there's Austria-Hungary and the German Empire in between them and the French trenches. Remember, Czechoslovakia is not a country yet, where it's a half year before that. There's also a naval blockade here and at Arkhangelsk up here. So, Arkhangelsk and Murmansk, you're not able to go around through the Arctic Ocean. You're also not able to go through the Baltic. So Masaryk's galaxy brain plan that gets everyone to more or less agree to is that they're going to go from Kiev to Vladivostok using the Trans-Siberian Railway. So there's two halves of this story. Step one is you have to get to the Trans-Siberian Railway, crossing the Ukrainian plain, and then the start of the Ural Mountains. And then once you can cross the Ural Mountains in between Nizhny Novgorod and Omsk, you then have to cross the entirety of Siberia. The rail line that they used basically runs from... They picked up somewhere near Moscow, passed through passed south of Nizhny Novgorod, through Chelyabinsk, through Omsk, through Irkutsk, and then across the Trans-Manchurian Railroad to get over to Vladivostok, where there were supposed to be American, French, and Japanese cargo ships waiting for the Legion. This whole thing is somewhere in the vicinity of 7,500 miles. 6,000 miles of rail line, but you have to get to the rail line first. Now, there were rail lines connecting Ukraine and Russia, but they are contested territory with a lot of stress and a lot that can go wrong. So, the first major engagement of the evacuation occurs at Bakhmut, which is near the city of Chernihiv, which has been in the news, and Americans are more aware of Chernihiv than Bakhmut, so, you know. Bakhmut is fascinating. Where do the Czechoslovak Legion's orders initiate? Tomáš Masaryk. Tomáš Masaryk actually makes the trip himself ahead of the Legion to make sure everything's smoothed over. So, Masaryk personally orders that evacuation with the approval of the French High Command, whom the Czechoslovak Legion was officially under. And so yeah, it is the president of Czechoslovakia, effectively, who is doing a lot of the diplomacy in person with local Soviets. It's bonkers. But yeah, Bakhmut is interesting because the Czechoslovak Legion stole all the weapons from the warehouses they were guarding in Kiev. Let's just be clear on that. They stole those weapons. The Soviets were not happy about that, and so the condition of letting them through was that they give up most of those weapons. They reluctantly agree, but before they have a chance to do a lot of that trade-off, German forces attack them at the rail depot, which is where all the Ukrainian rail lines meet up. Bakhmut? Bakhmut. Okay. a bunch of the Ukrainian rail lines meet up there. That's a major depot in this period. And so, obviously, German forces want to capture that. And so the Czechoslovak Legion and Bolshevik forces, all trying to evacuate, end up kind of mostly encircled by German forces. And that gets pretty tense for a bit. Well, the Czechoslovak Legion does the bulk of the fighting here, and is actually able to repel the Germans for long enough that their rail cars can get through, and then you put on the steam all the way and manage to break through into the Ural Mountains. Some of the trains get damaged, which has unfortunate consequences we'll talk about during the gameplay itself. But they managed to get through that first hurdle and get through. The rest of the story of March through May is one of a lot of tension. As they end up breaking into Russia proper, and the Czechoslovak Legion gets incredibly spread out because the Bolshevik government sends orders all across the rail line to try and stall and delay them as much as possible. The Bolshevik government, in particular Leon Trotsky, who is not involved with the initial agreement, does not trust the Legion, and the Legion does not trust Trotsky. Slayer, thank you for the follow just now, by the way. So, by May 1918, the Czechoslovak Legion is wildly spread out. The westernmost group are near Parva, which is south of Nizhny Novgorod, on the west bank of the Volga River. And the easternmost group is in Vladivostok. Some of them already made it by May 1918. The main groups, though, were in between Chelyabinsk and Irkutsk. Those are where the majority of the trains are, and they are generally isolated. It's rare to have more than 3 or 4 kind of put together. Well over 1,000 miles of rail. And so Trotsky is like, no, we gotta stall them, we gotta get them to give up the weapons. And so they just get increasingly spread out and isolated. In this forced boredom, things get really, really tense. Trotsky wants 2 things. 1, he wants the Legion's weapons. And 2, he wants the Legion's manpower. Czechoslovak communists living in Russia told the Soviet government, oh yeah, they would totally fight for the Red Army. You just have to persuade them of it, right? They love the motherland. They love the proletariat idea. They will totally do this. The actual Legion wants to get the hell home. This is just fabrication by Czechoslovak communists. And so, there are repeated orders in early May and then again in late May that the Czech Legion has to give up all of its weapons. This is an ultimatum given by Trotsky to the Czechoslovak ambassador. The ambassador passes on to the Legion, and the Legion says no. Well, the first time they sort of say no. They say, yeah, that's fine. And they take apart their machine guns, they take apart their rifles, they build fake ceilings and fake floors in their train cars, hide them under their bedrolls, hide them in other workshops on the trains, and basically say, yeah, you can take our artillery, but they hide most of their small arms. Because they do not think that the Bolsheviks are going to let them all the way across without fighting. There's a bunch of other diplomatic nonsense that we're going to get through, including an order by the Entente to have everyone west of Omsk actually go up to Arkhangelsk instead of Vladivostok. The British are the ones who push for this, and this is because the British want to use the Czechoslovak Legion as a garrison to guard against the Central Powers and reopen the Eastern Front. The French are not super on board with this, and the Legion is furious at this. And so they basically ignore that order too, TBH. But on May 23rd, 1918, Leon Trotsky sends an order to the Soviet in Omsk that says, you are going to take all their weapons, you are going to conscript everyone who is remotely willing, and you are going to impress the rest of them into forced labor camps. They pass this. The Soviet passed this on to the Legion at Omsk, and they're like, nah, absolutely not. We are going east by any means necessary. Get the hell out off the tracks. And so on May 20, I think it's the morning of May 24th, the first fighting breaks out just west of Omsk, and then fighting immediately over the next about week, breaks out over the entire rest of the train line going west. Now, here's the thing. Thanks to hiding their forces, the fact that the Bolsheviks are fighting a war on about a bajillion fronts, and a half a dozen other things involving the decentralized structure of the early Bolsheviks, the Czechoslovak Legion is the best armed and best trained military unit in Siberia. So they win at Omsk, they win at Perva, they win at Chelyabinsk, they win a little bit later at Yekaterinburg, and they win at Irkutsk. And so the situation over the summer, over repeated fighting and trains crisscrossing Siberia to reinforce each other, they are the dictators of the entire stretch of rail line from Chelyabinsk to Vladivostok. It's bonkers. So they are effectively the great military force in the region. And they managed to navigate this remarkable military success with equally remarkable diplomacy. They freely make and break alliances with local Soviets, who they're very good at persuading to let them through. With the right SRs, who are a peasant, socialist, anti-Bolshevik party, who have lots of power bases around, like, Novonikolayish, I think is how you say that, in central Siberia, and with the White Army. So, there's a small digression at this point to point out the politics of the Russian Civil War. Because in September, orders come in from the French High Command, as the army at the Czechoslovak Legion at this point is mostly at Irkutsk or east, and they receive orders, no, turn around. You are reinforcing the whites at the Volga River. This makes them furious. This is probably one of the big strategic blunders of the foreign command for the Czechoslovak Legion. But here's the situation. By September 1917, Novonikolaevsk. Cool. Sorry, the Volga River is all the fuck back west. Yeah. Yes, it is. So here's the situation. In the fall of 1918, the Red Army is fighting on 3 different fronts. First is around Arkhangelsk and Murmansk. British, American, and Japanese forces land at Murmansk and Arkhangelsk and establish a northern front against the Reds. On the eastern border, you get first anti-Bolshevik forces in Ukraine, who were like the remnants of the Russian Imperial Army. But then you also get the Central Powers posing a pretty major threat. Along the south here, you'll have several anti-Bolshevik armies, and in the east, you have the single largest anti-Bolshevik force, headed up by Alexander Kolchak. Kolchak is not a good person. Oh, it's Novosibirsk. Oh, that makes so much more sense. I did not realize those were the same city. I thought Novonikolaevsk was farther east. Anywho, um, Kolchak's not good, but he is propped up by France and Britain. He is receiving quite a lot of money and intelligence from them, and the Czechoslovak Legion is officially part of the French army. So, guess who's now on the front lines? Around Perm and Samara, you've got the Czechoslovak Legion arrayed on about 150 miles of front. This goes badly. Right, especially after October 28th. Remember, that's the day that Czechoslovakia becomes an independent country. The Czechoslovak Legion, by the end of 1918, is asking, why the hell are we still here? We have a home. We did our job. We want to go home. But they're stuck on the wrong end of the rail line. And so morale drops so far by January 1919 that they are pulled off the front line and instead are arrayed out along the entire length of the Trans-Siberian Railway, all the way up to Irkutsk, basically, and are stationed as basically the rear guards to control all of the supplies. This means that they often have do forays out into Siberia for battle, but then their trains become much more stationary. And around these trains, across 1919, the big theme that I see taken away from this is the emergence of basically mini communities that exist on the peripheries of existing train depots and cities that are centered on the stationary train cars. So it's worth reading at length here a quote from Dalibor Vacha's Teplушkas and Echelons, the Czechoslovak legionaries on their journey across Russia. He is summarizing an actual memoir written by a legionnaire. Rudolf Vlasak left a picture of one echelon of a cavalry regiment, which can help give us a picture. The echelon had 27 residential wagons, the last 7 of which were reserved for families, and known as the villa quarter. Each villa had its own sign on the door or next to it. Vlasak records the little villa names. Ustashnik, at the happy couple. Male, ale nash, small, but our own. Ukrasny pani, at the beautiful ladies. Rai, paradise, and Uzladi Shavla, at the golden saber, inscribed on signs, edged with tasteful frames of birch sprigs or green brush. Nor did he forget to comment in his typically engaging and often highly mocking idiom on the family interior. The married soldier had fixed up things for himself there in, quote, fancy style. A wide bed, table, trunk, all kinds of crockery straight out the Russian journal Ogonyak, and similar things adorned his villa, in which one half comprised the reception salon, guest room, kitchen, bedroom, everything. Now, observe these are 4 families. Across late 1918 and 1919 in particular, there was quite a few shocking weddings between Russian women and Czechoslovak legionnaires. The military structure did not forbid this in any way, and the result is that there are full communities, right? There's a bunch of train dormitories and barracks of single legionnaires, but then the train cars are also converted to family apartments. And so they're the most mobile homes of the early 20th century. So you have families with children running around in these full communities that sometimes have cinemas. There's one community near Novosibirsk that has a cinema just off the train tracks. You've got music going on all the time. They pick up gardening. So you have like herb gardens growing in the Siberian summer outside of Czech Legionnaire train cars. And the overall mood is not good, but there is some sense of like roots starting to be formed in this area, and the Czechoslovak Legion finding some semblance of normalcy. the, I mean, 27 residential wagons, which are converted cargo bays, plus workshops, plus military armament supplies, plus fuel cars, plus the locomotive itself. So these are like 40 to 60 train cars at their largest. The thing is, this normalcy shatters at the end of 1919. Big blow occurs early in the year when Milan Stefanik travels to Russia to meet with people all along the train line. And officially, the order comes through in mid-January but is announced at the end of February. The Assembly of the Czechoslovak Legion, the autonomous governing body that dictated much of Czechoslovak legionnaire policy throughout 1918, is disbanded. Stefanik knows this will be unpopular and bails a month and a half before it gets announced. Morale was already pretty bad. It craters after this. It is officially then subsumed into the Czechoslovak parliament because Czechoslovakia just had elections. And so obviously, now that a government is forming, we don't need the military to be its own government. By September of that year, the various White armies under Admiral Kolchak, Anton Denikin, and Mikhail Kiderichs lose control of the Siberian front completely. They lose battle after battle as Bolshevik forces and discipline grows, and the front line shatters. Bolshevik forces, if we go back to our map, push all the way from here to Omsk from September to November. And Omsk is Kolchak's capital city. They capture it. The moment that happens, they get the order coming from Ian Surovi, the highest-ranking Czech officer in the Legion, for the Legion to evacuate Vladivostok, period. To do this, they abuse, frankly, the fact that they were already assigned to control much of this Trans-Siberian Railway. So, there's tons of evacuees, anti-Bolshevik evacuees trying to get to Manchuria, Siberian forces just caught up in the general panic and disarray. These family units that are formed, broken in a single order. And so there's mass panic and disarray. Tons of train cars get left abandoned because locomotives are at a premium, and they can't pull that much. And Czechoslovak forces bully everyone else off the line at the cost of threats, shootouts with the ragtag, decrepit forces of the Whites, and civilian refugees. So, one legionnaire, Adolf Zeman says, our Teaplushkas, earlier our dwellings, and generally comfortable by Siberian standards, now became a real hell, with as many as 24 brothers squashed into them with all their property. Add to that refugees, families, children. There could be as many as 40 people stuck into one of these cargo cars. It is brutal, it is chaotic, and it is miserable. And despite all of that, due to a lack of Japanese and American ships on hand, it takes until November 1920, 2 full years after World War I ends, and over 2 years since Czechoslovakia becomes independent, for the final Legion ship to leave Vladivostok. But then finally, by early 1921, everyone is home. And they are welcomed as heroes. It takes a few years for some of them to get citizenship, but by about 1925, pretty much everyone who served in the Legion is given honors and full citizenship to Czechoslovakia. The first arrivals of the Legion back actually immediately go to war again, this time against Hungary, and then Poland. But, eventually the borders of Czechoslovakia stabilize, and they are welcomed as heroes. Veterans of the Legion become the core of the Czechoslovak military. They become the core of the police force, volunteer fire brigades, and then professional fire brigades. And they often go back. Workshop members of the Legion become prominent accountants, lawyers, bankers within Czechoslovakia. The image here is of the facade of Legionarská banka, the Czechoslovak Legion Bank. By the way, if that was a thing, the Legionnaires had their own bank. It gets roped or wrapped up into the national banking system by the 1930s, but continues to be a beautiful and prominent facade in the Prague's city center. And now we can think about the afterlife of this and their memory, right? Because it begs the question, right? We have all of this material. How do we know about it? Well, we know about it from several things. In the 1920s and 30s, there was an explosion of Czech language literature about the Legion. Legionnaires published their own memoirs and journals. We have the diplomatic things from, mostly in this first period, from Austria-Hungary, France, and Stefanik and Maastricht, about their diplomatic efforts. So we have telegram records, we have letters written, we have transcripts of speeches, we have all of this stuff coming out to supplement this information. Later, we get access to Soviet telegrams and communications in published editions starting in the 1930s, but obviously in the last 20-30 years, a ton more access to Soviet documentation. We have photo albums. Navrat Czechoslovensky Legii is a photo album of the trains taken in the period by Legionnaires. We also have a lot of fiction. So, Legionnaires like František Langer released stories like Jižní hlídka, which is about a cavalry regiment in the Czechoslovak Legion. These ones are particularly interesting for us because Last Train Home is directly in their lineage. These accounts are fictional, right? The details in them do not happen. But they are really concerned with the feel, right? The idea of what the daily life is like. And if you look at how Ashburn Games has described the game, they use the exact same verbiage, right? But they are really interested in the how of the Czechoslovak Legion, and not the what. The what is incredibly well documented. But there has been far less work on the historical experiences, and only recently do I think has there been enough written to really be able to reconstruct that and turn that into a game. And that is what Last Train Home is really interested in doing. So, here are the sources that I referenced at the top here, with writings by David Bullock, Victor Fitz, who is Czech-American, Nicholas Fixler, George Kennan, Jakub Novak, and Dalibor Vacha. There's also a lot more written in Czech and in English. So Vratislav Pretzlik wrote a thing that I found a citation for but can't read because it's not been translated on Tomáš Masaryk and the Legion. Dalibor Vacha just did something right on the picture of the return of the Czech legionnaires to their homeland in their recollections, like just a few years ago, published on that. And then there's additional works in English by John Bradley, Henry Barlin, and Vladimir Nosek. In particular, right, if you're looking to learn more about this, Victor Fitz's work or George Kennan's are both fabulous narrative histories in the 50s and the 70s, respectively, about the details of the Legion in exorbitant archival detail. But Nicholas Fixler provides a fantastic overview of the English language scholarship on the Czechoslovak Legion, and Dalibor Vacha is just a wealth of knowledge for the Czech, Slovakian, and Russian language literature. So these two articles in particular are super duper worth your time if you are interested in doing more. I'll leave this up here for a moment so everyone can screenshot that if they need it. But yeah, that covers the extremely short version of the narrative overview for the game. There's a lot of detail in here that we're going to be able to dig into together over the course of the playthrough, but that should give you enough of a grounding to understand the big phases of what we're dealing with. And as we hear dialogue in the game about different Bolshevik actors and the Czech sentiment that we hear expressed by characters throughout the game, to be able to sort of piece that in within this narrative history and see how the game uses one train to construct a snapshot of 100 trains. Alright. So much for our presentation part of this stream. And of course, also thank you, ArchaeologyTube Bill, for the follow a few minutes ago. It was super appreciated. And Kelkin, yes, thank you for answering that. But yeah, Ashbourne Games is based in Brno, and so is a predominantly Czech team, which is really, really lovely to see. And I'm glad the launch has been so successful so far. I was looking earlier on it, and it looks like the game is having a fantastic launch, and I am really, really happy about it. Yeah, I mean, good lord. The bibliography I had is just on the Czechoslovak Legion. And if you want to become an expert on the Russian Civil War and the Russian Revolution, have fun. Yeah. There's simply too much happening. There's been millions of pages written, so enjoy. Alright. Now, we are going to take just a very quick ad break so I can stand up and stretch and finish one drink and pour another drink. And then we're going to hop into the game itself. So, if you've been waiting for that, we are almost there. But yes, if you have to get going, totally understandable. I'm glad you found it interesting. And if you liked it, of course, do consider dropping a follow. But we'll be back in anyway in just 3 minutes. And then we are going to start up the game itself. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back.